Sanford Riley was born in Montreal in 1951. His father, originally from Winnipeg, moved there to attend McGill, where he met Sandy's mother.
We lived in Montreal for the first 2 or 3 years of my life and then came back to Winnipeg when he went into business with his brother. Unfortunately, he died of cancer at the age of 29. My mother remarried shortly after that, had 3 small children, remarried, and we moved to Ottawa with my stepfather, who really was my father in a sense. He was the person who really raised us. My father was the governor of the Bank of Canada, but he was a Winnipegger. And after he left his position as head of the bank, we moved to Toronto for a couple of years, and then he came back to Winnipeg to start what was called then the Bank of Western Canada.
Sandy's family summered at Lake of the Woods, where he met Hartley Richardson at the Royal Lake of the Woods Yacht Club.
He was very competitive, a bit intense. No, actually, he was very intense. When he got into a sailboat, he got in to win.
I went to the Olympics twice. The first time was in 1972, and I went as a member of the team, but not as the competitor. I was there to sort of train the guy who was competing and party in the evenings, basically. 4 years later, I was 25 years old, I was married, and I was the competitor. I actually could have, should have, would have won an Olympic medal if I hadn't been disqualified from the second race. I'd won the first race, so there was a lot of tension on me, and it was a very, very interesting experience. It made more interesting because we just had a baby.
The baby was not due for another 7 or 8 weeks, but the first night of the before the first race of the Olympic trials, I just realized that something was happening. We consulted one of the other sailors who was a doctor, and he said, oh, well, maybe you should just run over to the hospital. So Sandy went out sailing, and they had to go out on a long tow line. It took them an hour to get out to the place where they were sailing. And I drove myself to the hospital and had the baby. At the end of it all these women were lined up on the shore, like this, just, and Sandy got in, and they said, we're going to de-rig your boat. You go to the hospital. So he did, and he just arrived in time to see them whisking our baby down to the neonatal unit. So that was our first child, Jessica.
Sandy's busy schedule often required him to be in 2 places at once.
I remember playing hockey with him one night at River Heights Community Club. We were on the bench, and the rink manager came over to ask us if we had a Sandy Riley playing on the team. And we said, yeah, that's him out there, number 7. And the guy says, tell him he's supposed to be speaking at the squash club right now. Well, Sandy does a whirlwind tour of the dressing room, a Superman change, barrels down Grosvenor, gets to the squash club a couple hours late, and gives a great speech. So I think these mix-ups and the arriving late are part of his charm. People seem to accept it and like it.
I would say that he's the Formula One driver and I am the pit crew. He comes screeching into a halt and I change the tires and I, give him some water and, and then he goes racing off again. When I was younger, I used to think, well, when he gets older, we'll sit quietly in our rocking chairs and we'll read each other the interesting things in the paper, and that's never going to happen.
She has been a huge supporter. She's put up with an awful lot. She's moved back and forth between Winnipeg and Toronto and carried the brunt with the kids, but really has been my conscience through all these years, making sure that I was doing the right thing. If she ever thought I wasn't doing the right thing, she would let me know in a moment.
Sandy Riley went to the prestigious law school, Osgoode Hall, and his brief career as a lawyer taught him one thing. He wanted to go into business. The next few years were a whirlwind for Sandy. While practicing as a lawyer, he started a credit union, an investment securities company. And then following that, he worked for the Bronfman family at Trilon Financial, where he eventually became CEO.
Then I got a call one day from a headhunter early in the year of 91 saying, do you know anybody who might be interested in looking at the job of being Chief Executive Officer of Investors Group? Now, that is really code for the headhunter saying, are you interested? And I went home to my wife, and we had just finished constructing her dream house. Literally, we're just putting the finishing touches on, and I walked in and said, I've had this really interesting call about becoming the CEO of Investors Group back in Winnipeg, and my wife, you could just see her face drop.
He'd only been in it for not even a year, I wouldn't think. So when we first heard about it, the kids were just desolate, you know, to leave their friends and leave their schools and everything else. But I knew it was a wonderful, wonderful opportunity for Sandy, and we had friends in Winnipeg.
So I went to an interview, had the interview, and then didn't hear a word for 6 months. One day in early October, I was running in the ravine in Toronto, and I bumped into the headhunter who'd called me. And I said, well, I guess you filled that job. He says, oh, no, we haven't filled it. You're the primary candidate. I said, well, I haven't heard a word from anybody for 6 months. He said, well, that's how they work. It was a very challenging but very exciting 10-year period in my career. We tackled the big bugaboo, which was the argument was always made that Investors Group was a product-pushing organization focusing on selling the mutual funds of Investors Group, and we spent an awful lot of time broadening out the offering of Investors Group. The core of Investors Group has always been the quality advice its advisors provide and the financial planning ethic that the firm has built up over 80 years.
Investors Group has always had strong ties to the community, and Sandy maintained the tradition in a big way.
Sandy's quick to jump into any project that you propose to him, and the Pan Am Games were the biggest one, I think, that he's ever taken on. And to be honest, we knew nothing about the games, but he managed to have the confidence and the enthusiasm to figure it out and help us pull out what I think was a real turning point in Winnipeg's evolution. When we put on those games, every blade of grass was cut in Winnipeg, every fence was painted. People took pride in showing off Winnipeg to the world, and that enthusiasm carried on for many years to come.
Being the chairman of the Pan American Games was a hobby, and a pleasurable hobby, because I got to work with all kinds of friends of mine, and I made a lot of new friends as well, on something that was enormously important to the community at that stage. And we all worked together, and we made it happen, and the sense of pride that we all felt in the community and in ourselves as a group for having pulled this thing off was something you can't replace. The feelings you have of that kind of connection to people. And that's why being involved in the community is so important, because you build this sense of belonging and this sense of connection to people that makes your life so much fuller.
And Sandy has described this, that a community is an act of will, and that all the wonderful things that we enjoy in Winnipeg only exist because people in the community decided that they would exist.
Sandy and I spent a lot of time together when he became the first independent director on our family board. He was the first non-family member to join the board. And we had talked about what he might do after he stepped down as CEO of Investors Group. And one weekend down at his cottage at Lake of the Woods, we sat on the dock. We talked about developing a proudly Canadian independent financial services company. And we determined rather if we wanted to have our own culture and our own values established, we would, rather than buy one, we would start one. So that's what we did. It was a rather bold and audacious move. When we formed Richardson Financial Group, Sandy understandably had no interest in being an employee. He wanted to be a partner. Could very well have been a first in that context for our company. We built a company and an enterprise that we're both very proud of.
I think over the years, I've got my greatest satisfaction in anything by getting together with other people of like minds and working on a common project and stretching all of your capabilities as a group. Celebrate their successes as well as yours, and recognize that to the extent you're successful is because others have really helped, and make sure they know that you understand that.